everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today to share with you my South Africa TBR for 2023, and the reason that I am putting this TBR together is because my family and I are traveling to South Africa this March. My husband was born in South Africa, and so we have family there, and we actually did visit there in 2005, the two of us. And now that we have our two sons and they are older, we are really excited to be taking them to South Africa to visit some of my husband's family, but also just to be back there. It was a transformative experience, to say the least, when I visited there in 2005, and one of the greatest trips of my life. And I'm very excited to go back there and be on that continent again, and just, you know, go with a different perspective, because I'm older now. I have a different way of looking at the world, and I certainly didn't read a whole bunch of books before I went last time. I'm excited to share that TBR with you in case you would like to add some South African authors and books to your TBR. So here we go. I'm starting off with one that is not South African at all. This is Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. And the reason that I'm going to reread this book is because on our way to South Africa, we are stopping in Amsterdam, and we are hoping to visit Anne Frank's home, which has been turned into a museum. And so I wanted to reread this and just familiarize myself. I read this when I was 13, and so I thought it was a good time to revisit it right before going to Amsterdam and being in the place where it was written. So that is a little aside from the South Africa TBR. So I've put together a list of books, and I'm not going to be able to read all of these before I go because it's January and we're leaving in March. So obviously this is more books than I'm actually going to be able to read. But I thought I would pick a few each month to read, and I would go through the books that I found that were of interest to me specifically, and you can investigate further if any of them interest you. So I'm going to start with the book that I've already started, Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. This is his autobiography. Nelson Mandela, obviously a very famous freedom fighter, the first president post-apartheid of South Africa, and just, you know, a man who needs very little explanation. If you don't know who Nelson Mandela is, I'm not exactly sure where you've been for the last on this planet. And so this is a comprehensive autobiography about his life, and this is how far I've gotten so far. So I think he's about 21 at this stage where I'm at, so still attending school. And you know, I've had this book for many years. This was on one of my husband's family's bookshelves, and it was passed on to us to keep, and so I've thought this was the perfect time to start reading it. So here we go. I'm hoping to get this done before we leave, because I don't want to carry this big bulky book with me all the way to South Africa. So I'm going to do my best to read it all. It's 750 pages, so it's a very big book. So 2 months is going to be the least amount of time I need. So I'm going to have to try to read a couple chapters per day to get this one done before we go. On my TBR for January is The Woman Next Door by Yewande Omotoso, and this is a story about two neighbors, a white neighbor and a black neighbor. They share a fence and their interactions with each other. This one I've had on my TBR for many years. Tanya read this a long time ago and recommended it highly, and as soon as she recommended it, I put it on my TBR, and now I'm finally getting to it for the month of January. Another book that we have on our shelves is Invictus by Carlin. So this is a book about the Springboks, which is the one of the national teams of South Africa, the national rugby team of South Africa. And Nelson Mandela rallied people around the team in order to help with reconciliation around apartheid. And so this is the story of that, I believe. It is explaining how Mandela wanted to unite South Africans, and this was the time, and this was the method that he used, was to try to use the Springboks to bring that unity together. And this became a film a few years ago. You can see Matt Damon here. So this is the film adaptation cover. To be honest with you, I don't think I'm going to read this book. And that's just because I'm not a huge fan of reading about sports. It can get very boring for me. But I do think I probably will watch the film. Because I don't know if I've ever seen it, and if I have seen it, I've kind of forgotten it. So this would probably be a really good film to watch with my kids and getting us prepared for our trip. All right. So the next book I have on my list is The Promise by Damon Galgut. This is a pretty famous book in literary circles. It won the Booker Prize in 2021, I believe. This is a white South African, This is a white South African story centered around with a gay narrative, I believe. That's really all I know about it. I didn't want to get too much description of it because I find, especially with books that are as hyped as the Booker Prize winners, if I hear about them too much, I just don't want to read them. So I've got this one on my list. I doubt I will read this one either. It's quite long, I believe, and but it's definitely something. Any of Damon Galgut's work, I think, should be on any South Africa TBR that you're creating for yourself. And then the next one I have is Yewande by Dawn Promislow, and this is set in 1970 South Africa, I believe. And it is an artist who has her own property, a white artist, I believe, and she invites people to come and stay on her property, other artists, and it's about her coming to terms with apartheid and understanding its true repercussions on society as a white privileged person. And that's a newer one that I found while searching for this list. The next one on the list is A Conspiracy of Mothers by Colleen van Niekerk. And this is apartheid era, I believe 1980s, and it has 3 different mothers who are facing different challenges under the apartheid regime. Sounds very, very interesting. The next one I found was Kafka's Curse by Achmat Dangor. And what I was really interested about in this book is that this is a Muslim immigrant perspective about South Africa. And I think what's important to remember whenever you're talking about going to a country that has many, many layers to its history is that there's many, many voices in those layers. And so the immigrant voice to South Africa, which is, my husband's ancestors were immigrants to South Africa. And this is specific to the Muslim immigrant voice in South Africa. I think one of the main themes of this novel is layers of identity. So the main character ends up passing for another culture, married to someone of another culture. So a lot of cross-cultural, cross-race conversations and layers of identity and survival in a time when race was such a dangerous reality for so many people living in South Africa. The next one on my list is Tsotsi by Athol Fugard, and this one was made into a film as well. This is a book about a young gang leader living in Soweto outside of Johannesburg during apartheid, I believe, as well. So this one is examining this young man's morals as he runs with the gangs and lives in Soweto, which in case you don't know is the area outside of Johannesburg where most Black people live, and you know, it's considered to be it's a place of poverty, it's a place of crime, it's a place of beautiful community as well, if you watch any contemporary videos about it. But overall, when you're looking at the status of people living there versus the status of people living in the main part of Johannesburg, it is a place of poverty and disenfranchisement for a lot of the people that live there. The next book on the list is All Rise, which is Resistance and Rebellion in South Africa. This is a graphic novel, and it follows multiple stories of different men and women who fought against apartheid. And so this is probably one that I will be reading with my son. And it looks like there's multiple artists who represent the different stories in this book as well. The next one I have is Crossroads, I Live Where I Like, which is a graphic history also by Connie Benson. So this one follows different life narratives, but this time referring more to the Cape Town area. And again, it's another graphic history intermingled with personal stories, so it sounds really, really compelling. So I also have a few other nonfiction books on this TBR. One of them is Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. I think everyone has heard of this one. I know this one is actually really good on audio, but I believe you can only get it from Audible, and I don't have an Audible account. But this is Trevor Noah's story of his life, about his parents, having one Black and one white parent, and what that means in South Africa under apartheid. So I think this one is probably one of the most popular and famous South African narratives that you could choose to get. We also have Black Lion, Alive in the Wilderness by Sicelo Mbatha, which is a story about Sicelo's love of nature and his work with nature. So if you're more interested in nature referenced writing, nonfiction, I think this is probably a good option for you. This is about his work in the bush. He is a activist working with conserving nature, and I'm really actually very interested in reading this one as well, because we will be going on safari, so we will be out in the bush, and it's really nice to hear about conservation efforts that are going on in South Africa, because they have such a diverse country with so many different types of climates and of course amazing animals, so it's going to be really interesting to read about that. Next, I have Always Another Country by Sisonke Msimang. And Sisonke Msimang has lived in several different African countries, as well as Canada. This is a story about home. It's a story about belonging, her own personal story, but I think she covers those themes of belonging and home. And she goes back to South Africa later on, and is so happy to be back in Africa, but also is able to analyze kind of the different parts of the society that are still need work and still need improvement in order for equality to be, and justice to be fair for everyone living in society. And then the last nonfiction one I have is Miriam's Song by Miriam and Mark Mathabane. And this is Miriam's memoir of staying behind in South Africa when her brother left. And she grew up in the 1980s under apartheid, and so this is her personal story, and this also kind of talks about the birth of democracy and that kind of transitionatory time as well. And then the other book I'm going to recommend to you, which I read a few years ago now, was A Blade of Grass by Louis de Soto. This is a fictional account of a white woman living on a farm quite far into the bush, I believe near the border with Zimbabwe, and her and a Black maid that works for her, and their friendship and their relationship, and it kind of goes through their both of their perspectives and tries to show you like how they come together as friends and all the complications around that relationship. And it's also talking about a specific period in South African history. I believe it's set in the 1970s, if I'm not incorrect there. But it was kind of a land reclaiming, just a very tumultuous time in the history of apartheid. And so there's like some violence that happens near the end as well around who owns this land and things like that. So it's a very complex story, very layered. It stayed with me. When I read it years ago, I didn't think it was, it wasn't like a book I fell in love with, but the story itself has stayed with me. So I feel like that shows that the characters and the writing were good, and they've stayed in my heart. So there are some books for you if you're interested in adding books around South Africa to your TBR. I hope to have some really wonderful footage that I can put together for you all when I return from South Africa, but that's a few months out still. So until then, I will be reading these books. And if you have any books, South African, about South Africa, written by South Africans, that you would like to recommend that I didn't talk about today, please put them in the comments down below so that other people can find those suggestions as well. And I thank you very much for watching. I'll be back again soon with another video.